It's Don here from the board. Thanks for coming along and checking out this video. Today we're going to be having a look at the AE board's satellite electro-capacitance conversion kit. So thanks very much to the folk at the Keyboard Treehouse and AE boards for sending me this sample to work with. It's probably one of the first kits that I've really heard about or come across that will convert a standard MX keyboard design into a electro-capacitance setup. Now, I do have actually a number of EC boards, number of what we would colloquially call top ray, but top ray rubber dome keyboards are, it's a trademark name. So electro-capacitance is really what they are about, and how they work slightly differently compared to a normal MX switch is that instead of it being a contact switch, it actually uses electro-capacitance to drive a completely different circuit board kind of system. And so if you have a look in any of the videos that I've got on this channel on, say, like the HHKB or the Leopold 660C, and we get into some of the insides of that, then you'll notice that they're a little bit different, and they typically will have a rubber dome for the actual switch return, and then there's a conical spring which generates sort of the field response that the actual PCB and the chip will detect. So it is a slightly different kind of system. Some people don't really want to call EC boards a mechanical keyboard, but I mean, a bit of a gray area for some. Now, I actually really do like my EC boards. As a matter of fact, at the moment I'm using my FC660C at work because I used to have an office and I was using my down bubble with the Kale box pinks in it. However, due to office reshuffling, I no longer have an office and I live in the general population, and to reduce my sound signature and bother to other people, I've actually switched over to using my Leopold. So I don't have a problem with them. I do enjoy the feel, I do enjoy the sound, and they are nice in general. So very happy when Keyboard Treehouse reached out to me and said, hey, are you interested in checking out this kit, do a video, and then also possibly, if I was interested in helping them out, do a build guide as well in my own style. Now, I am aware that if you have a look on the Keyboard Treehouse, there is actually a link already to a build guide. I've had a look at it from Lightning Keyboards. It's really great, well laid out, but I'll still do one anyway, so we'll see how that goes. Now, before we get down on to the desk as normal, let's go have a look at the actual product on the website. So here it is. This is the Satellite EC Upgrade Kit. You can see what it is it's a bunch of parts that will turn and replace the actual PCB within your satellite into a EC kit. And this is a very different looking PCB compared to what you might be used to if you were accustomed to building MX type keyboards. So you'll get a plate, you'll get the actual PCB, and there'll be a bunch of screws and mounts to set up the gap between the actual plate and the PCB, and then the PCB should slot into the case as per normal. And this is sort of the layout options that you have available with it. Now, I've been led to believe, I think this is a 7U version of the PCB, but we'll see once I actually get down into the box. So you'll see you can do the conversion, you'll get the PCB, screws, standoffs, the plate, 625 standard or a 7U for the spacebar, and then you'll get the actual electrocapacitance switch. Now, this is actually something I'm interested to see as well as part of looking at this, is because normally in a Topper keyboard, I haven't actually played with, say, like the NIS boards or any of the non-Topper branded boards. They used to be, the domes would be in a sheet or separate individual domes, and then the springs underneath it. So always swapping them out or playing with them if you took it apart was a real bother. Now that we actually have switches with these elements internally, individually, one by one, that's actually really cool. Now, of course, I don't know how some of the other brands have done it that aren't the top row boards, like the NIS, I think Atom or Plum. Then yeah, it could be just following in that particular footsteps. So there is a very comprehensive build guide, which I will be referring to. I've had a quick look at it, but essentially, yeah, we'll put in some stabilizers, then you can put the standoffs so that there's actually the gap between the plate and the PCB. Then you can pop in the actual switches. You need to calibrate it because how it works is it detects the actual field strength change. I think it's the electromagnetic field that it's reading, or the electric field, as the conical springs get depressed, and then you can put it back together. So that's what we are going to be having a look at. Now let's hop on down. So they've sent me a box, got my name on it. There's the sticker from the actual shipping from Keyboard Treehouse, and it says EC PCB stream. Now I'm not doing this as a stream because these days streams are a bit harder for me to really do and manage in my current workspace and potential interruptions and disasters. So this will just have to be a normal video, which hopefully will go okay. So let's just have a look at how they've taped this box. There's tape across the middle, but there's no seam, so it's just on the edges here. Yeah, these days with two small children, inquisitive things as well as bickering and arguing, and my second child undergoing toilet training, it is yeah, sometimes a bit of a challenge to try and do things uninterrupted because accidents happen. Small children things happen. Okay, so here we go. We have 2 boxes of Navy ECs. So each of those I expect will be 35. Alright, so they're designed and manufactured via Texi. And we have a MX stem with a housing that fits into the PCB. And yep, it's got a rubber dome with a magnet in it. Okay, interesting. So rather than it just being a spring, it's got a magnet in it. That's cool. And then there's a QR code. There's a bit of a force curve in here. So these are a 45 gram actuation, 35 gram bottom out. So that's pretty nifty. Now this is a clear POM housing. Okay, maybe that's to change out the default ones in the actual navies here if we want to try different housings. And then this is going to be the actual kit with the parts in it. So let's liberate these from the box. We'll be careful with the box because they've got very limited numbers of these at the moment, so I will be using this to just send this home back to the folk at the Keyboard Treehouse. So, and that's also why I'm building on a mat today compared to normal. Alright, so I will be using this later on to complete that. So this is just a satellite from one of my previous videos as well. So let's just maybe put that aside somewhere else off the table to preserve table space. Let's put those aside and let's carefully crack this open. Very well packaged. So we have, there we go, there's the 70 plate, and then we've got the screws and standoffs in there, and then we've got the actual PCB here as well. So let's put that aside. Right. So the tools that you're probably going to need is at least a screwdriver, and you'll probably need something to help actually, it's Constellation EC. And here we go. So we have the AE boards, and it was designed by Cipulot. So Cipulot has been really one of the drivers of the keyboard community for EC boards. I know that they've got a whole bunch of other EC PCBs, and I had been looking at potentially getting a EC numpad to go with my 660C at work. So, but they're a bit hard to get hold of on the used market rather than paying for the brand new one if you can get them somewhere. So yeah, we've got a reset position here, reset DFU, and then remember to snap off the edge rails, remember to calibrate the PCB after assembly. There's Cipulot's website, Cipulot PCBs, and then up the top there's a bit of a quote from Aries: the real endgame is the friendships you made along the way. Okay, so there's that, and then we've got the actual 7U plate and parts up top as well. So they've put the masking tape over the top there. Let's just gently get that off. Now, I actually don't know if I should be snapping this off and mounting it, because they've asked me to send it back, which I won't be able to put it into the case with that on it. So what I might do is I will go through the process of actually putting the plate and the standoffs on it, but I'm not actually going to mount it in the keyboard, because I'm just concerned that if I'm snapping it off and they do need this as extra stock for an actual customer, it's going to be in a obviously not new condition for sale. Now, with careful assembly, it should not be an issue to be able to put this back, and effectively, you know, it's still new in terms of what we were planning on doing with it. Additionally, keeping that in mind, I'm actually not going to put any stabilizers on it. So this is going to, I guess, vary a bit from a standard build, simply because I do want to try and preserve the condition of this board as best as possible. Although, actually, if I get the stabies out, it should be okay, simply because they're screw-in, they're not snap-in, so they shouldn't really mar or mark the PCB at all. So we'll go and have a look at how that is. So over here we have we've got some screws. So there's screws with bigger heads, screws with smaller heads, and then there's the actual 26. Now these are required to actually hold up at the various points within the PCB, and you'll see that all the holes are actually marked with the arrows at the various points, and there's 26 mount points, and that's to ensure that the actual plate has sufficient support when you snap in the switches. So, hey, focus. All right. What I will do afterwards is I will reach out to Keyboard Treehouse just to confirm their thoughts around breaking the header off or not. But you know, that said, I think it should be okay to not, because there are going to be obviously other people who will be dealing with this. So I've got these stabies, but I'm just thinking maybe I won't even bother with them, so that there's no risk. There's no risk. I'm kind of risk adverse, especially if, you know, something like this is kind of somewhat new to what they've got available. So I do apologize if we're expecting to have a full mounted keyboard. But at the moment, maybe let's just turn this into a conversion video than anything else. All right. So now, if you've never actually broken PCB bits off, you will see that on the rails they have these bits here, if I can get it to focus. my ring light is proving to be a challenge there. But there's perforations. There we go. So there's these tiny little perforations that have actually been designed. There you go. You can see a row of perforations there, and they are across at every one of these join points. There's perforations there, and so forth. And so essentially, if you use a pair of pliers and you apply the force very carefully and you support it, you'll actually be able to snap them because they perforate all the way through. In the good old days, when we had some of these as well, you would actually have to get a sharp knife and actually score across to help break the fiberglass fibers in the actual PCB plate before you went and snapped it. Now, similarly, so this bottom row, the bottom rail, you'll see it's actually that sort of that whitish creamish color. That's actually just bare fiberglass. So they've already done a partial score all the way along the bottom there, which is the actual snap line, as it were. So, and you'll see that that's on both sides. So they've actually pre-scored that rather than doing a whole bunch of the individual holes. So just be careful with it. The fiberglass can break off and leave fragments and powder, so obviously, you know, if you're concerned, you can wear a mask, but to wipe up or vacuum up afterwards so that you don't have any loose fiberglass pieces and shards around the place. Okay, so here is the PCB. Sorry, here's the plate, and this is a 7U plate. So we can see that there's a whole bunch of these extra holes. Now, the reason why you kind of need this plate compared to the original plate is that, trying to get mine out here. Okay, so is that the default plate doesn't have those standoff mount points at all. Ignoring the color difference, there's just none of these points. So if you were to actually try and use the default plate on the satellite, it wouldn't work trying to snap in the switches. You wouldn't necessarily get a very good click in for those switches into the positions that they need to be. And you'll get a lot more flex as well because you don't have the extra support that the standoffs will provide the whole system on how it is mounted. So that's why it's pretty important to make sure that you use the right plate when you're actually putting it together as well. Okay, so let's get this tape off. Side. Won't need you anymore. A pair of scissors. So these are M2 screws, 2mm metrics, and that should be okay for that size. Now, when you do standoffs and things of that, there's obviously different ways to do it, but make sure that you check out the actual screws carefully because there is ones with big heads and ones with not big heads. The ones with the big heads are meant to go underneath the PCB through into the standoffs, whereas the smaller ones are meant to be through the actual plate. Now there's a whole bunch of these, and I'm just going to get one of my trays that I have. And that way we won't. Little wooden tray that I made myself, if I do say so myself. So there's the large headed ones. Just got to confirm that, yeah, so they've actually labeled it anyway for the plates and then for the PCB. So we'll pop that open. Put them into there, and then we will also pop out the standoffs into there because we're going to need both of them. Okay, so let's start dropping some of these into the back. We've got one. I'm just going to hold it there, and then finger tight for now. So all I've done is I've put one screw into that hole there, and then a corresponding standoff on the other side. Now once that's actually in, I can apply finger pressure to the other side and then very carefully finger tight that down. Don't need to crank it terribly hard. Definitely don't need to put any products like, you know, like a Loctite or a thread locker onto it. I mean, you could if you really wanted to, but yeah, you're just going to potentially damage it and strip it. Now, if you do have vibrations, then you might have to, if you are the type that types really hard, or your keyboard sits on, you know, a desk next to a train track or something. But I would say for most part, I've never had to use a thread locker at all on keyboard parts, internally or externally for that matter. Now these are quite fiddly, so if you've got really big fingers, you may find it a little bit of a challenge, but go slow, go careful, try not to drop them because these are incredibly small parts and pieces. But you should be able to get through them relatively easily and straightforward with a bit of care. Okay. We are nearly a sixth of the way through. Alrighty. So while I'm doing this, I guess of late on this channel you would have seen that there's been a lot of woodworking related content, and I've been really enjoying that space, to be honest. Doing keyboards is fun, but as a amateur, as a small sort of channel and space, and not somebody who's doing this dedicated full time, it's also quite costly because new keyboard stuff is just expensive in general. And so I am at the mercy of if people are kind and generous to send me stuff, or if I can find some really great bargains and deals, or if people are actually asking me to help them with, you know, builds or repairs and things that allow me to have content. Now, funnily enough, vintage woodworking tools are actually cheaper than keyboards. So I've been really enjoying that, because now that I've got a shed at the house, and I've got a bit of space, and I can get really simple, cheap, free scraps of wood from, like, you know, pallets and things like that from the businesses and shops around in the area, or even I'm trying to dry out some timber myself right now. So there was a tree, a lily-pilly tree that was cut down in the neighborhood, and the arborist basically put it up on Marketplace saying, you know, free firewood kind of thing. Went over and picked up a bunch of logs from it, and I've prepped them, I've split them, I've prepped them, and so I'm waiting for them to dry out, and I'll have my own lightweight hardwood that I've taken through the journey. So it's a different learning journey. It kind of still fits within the channel name, the board, because, you know, boards and woodworking work really well. But at the same time, there's a lot of applications to this kind of stuff, because I have been trying to make, you know, like wrist rest type things, and keyboard holders, and artisan holders, and things of that nature, and, you know, say like very simple trays. So definitely a very relaxing hobby, and where I'm at with that is also very much an amateur, but restoring the tools is really satisfying because you're taking something that somebody is essentially neglected quite often, rusty or damaged or bent, and giving it another life. And as I said, it can actually be quite cheap because people don't necessarily appreciate vintage tools, especially if it's not a collectible. Now, there's plenty of things that are collectible. Everything is collectible to the right person, but in the vintage tool world, there are ones that have a certain rarity or price value to them, and then everything else tends to be just junk in many people's eyes. So I'm lucky that I'm not a collector, but a person who wants to use these tools, so I can get the really cheap ones that aren't valued for their collector's market price, and then I can restore it and give it a second life in my fledgling workshop. So that's kind of why you'll be seeing a lot of the woodworking content, but whenever I do actually have keyboard content available, I put it up. Now, in regards to the podcast as well, the podcast hasn't really happened for a number of years now because, similar vein, there's only so much you can really talk about before it gets really repetitive. At the same time, talking solo as a podcast, it's just not the same. It's not as fun. It's not as interesting to have only me monologue about stuff and rant and rave, like I'm kind of doing right now, compared to having had, a host and guests where you can actually talk and have some interesting discussions. It's one of those things that I really did enjoy, but it was also difficult to do with time zone differences, staying up really late or getting up really early, especially with a lot of the bigger players being in countries outside of Australia, which just made it challenging. I haven't taken down the actual show from the host. I use Libsyn as the podcast host because, well, it's relatively low cost, and I'm happy to keep it up because thankfully my Patreons allow me to keep it up, the very small number. So big shout out to my Patreon supporters who are still with me. But even if they didn't, I do get sufficient revenue from the YouTube AdSense for the channel to keep that going. Now, of course, there's no new content, but I like to keep that back catalogue of episodes up so that if anybody is actually looking for something to listen to, they'll have a good amount of history available to them on what's actually happened in the community. Now, on Discord, for example, we constantly have new people joining. We constantly have talk, but it's hard to be enthusiastic enough to talk about it on a podcast if there's nothing that is groundbreakingly so. This is interesting. This is cool. But at the same time, community-driven EC boards has been around for a little while now. Drama is always happening, but at the same time, it's not necessarily nice, and a lot of the drama just ends up being the same. So once again, it's repetitive. So I don't really want to be talking about, oh no, another vendor went down. Oh no, another vendor tried to do an exit scam. It's difficult if you try to be a positive person when your content and frame of reference is constantly only talking about negative things. So that's kind of why things really just fell off. And then, of course, with life, with family, with work, cost of living crisis, inflation, everything else, there's better time spent to do things with other things that bears personal results rather than for the entertainment of other people. Especially because this is not my job. It is not my full-time career and focus. If it was, then obviously we would be having very different kind of conversations and content being talked about right now. All right, so we are nearly there. We are nearly there. Hasn't taken a crazy amount of time, and I'm just going at a steady process pace. Okay. Just confirming. Now I want to be careful around here because all of these components, the onboard components, they're the ones that you don't want to mess up. Now what's going to be really challenging about this part is I am going to have to undo all of these to put them back together to send this kit home. So I don't mind, to be honest. I think it's really great, and as much as I would like to, you know, keep a kit like this, I have so many keyboards already in my collection, primarily the OEM boards and sort of cheap stuff. I do have some boards that are a little bit nicer, but they're generally not community driven boards so much. You know, I do have obviously that satellite, thanks to AE boards, providing me that sample to keep. But with the kids and everything else, you know, my youngest is still young, 4, turning 5 this year. Still a bit of a snot ball, still a bit of a grubby hands kind of child from time to time, still coughing and sneezing at times. So putting something nice and new and you know, fancy on my desk right now is not really in my interest. Okay, so I seem to have one spare screw and standoff in the kit, which is perfectly fine. I'm just going to double check that all of the arrows are actually filled in by feel, just verifying that they're there. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. All 26 confirmed in. Now, of course, when you put the plate on, make sure that it aligns correctly. So you'll see that we've got the additional function row with the arrow key over here. So that does line up with the actual circles. And then we will have to go through that whole process again with the smaller screws. So we've got one. Let's just pick you up, get back into your home. Snap that up. So it's a screw bolt. Screws. Good job. Read the labels. The other thing around also trying to do content, and this is really not a complaint, but just a reality, is through the COVID period, working from home was really great, and then now everybody's being forced to go back into the office more, so that, you know, means more time in travel and less time, you know, after work to be able to do stuff, and yeah, get home and spend time helping around the house and doing other projects. Just gets a little bit more limited, that's all. Okay, so now let's go. Now, I do want to reiterate, so if you're skipping through this because you're kind of like, I just want to get to the good stuff, there are no stabilizers fitted in here. Now, if you were going to do this properly, you would have stabilizers fitted. Okay, so you're going to have your stabilizers for the backspace, you're going to have it for the enter, for the 2 shifts, and then for the spacebar. I'm not fitting them. I have not snapped off the rails for the reason that I will be sending this kit back, so it will go back into their available stock because it is limited stock for them at the moment. So this is just a speedy kind of build guide just to show you what is actually in the kit and what is involved. Okay, so I'm just going to drop that in. Just a brief counter tone to make sure the threads are lined up and we don't cross thread them. Hear that little click, clunk, and then we have, now the reason why the screws have the different sizes is because the smaller heads on top look neater. You don't want to have, you know, one that is big and fat and chunky. Okay, so that one's not really aligning well, so I'm just going to back these slightly to see if we've got a little bit of wiggle room. There we go. I guess I'll just put them in a little bit of a turn and I'll go back and tighten them up, because they do have a little bit of play in them. Always have to think of tolerances. There's nothing wrong with that as long as the end result will still work and line up. Now you can of course get really amazing tolerances, but that means you need the tolerances on all your parts. And it's not just about the holes that are screwed, that are drilled into the PCB or plates and the size and their positions, but it means the parts that you purchase. So the standoffs have to be straight as well, to a certain amount of tolerance, and how they are tapped and threaded have to be within a certain tolerance. Otherwise, you know, if you have standoffs that are slightly off or wonky, then your high tolerance holes and cutouts and everything else will not line up. So you have to work within the tolerances of the whole system as opposed to the tolerances of just what you're designing if you're relying on aftermarket, well, third-party provided, not aftermarket necessarily, components. If you commissioned every single item, then yeah, you could have the guarantees as part of your procurement processes, as part of your product development process, that they will be in tolerance. You can get spec sheets and certification from suppliers, but then you have to obviously have the trust that what they've done is true to what they've told you. I would say that in, say, the keyboard space, it's less of an issue, but if you're in, say, aerospace, it's a far better thing to make sure you've got the checks and balances to ensure what they tell you, what they claim are actually true. So you kind of have to do your own testing and validation sometimes, because critical components failing when you cannot afford them to fail is a significant concern. Right, we are nearly there. Just looking for little holes to put these into. Actually, later on when I take some pictures to do a little bit of a build guide kind of thing, I'm going to have to take them back, take a picture of the whole setup and then go backwards, maybe. But then if I talk to the treehouse and they go, oh no, don't worry about it, you can break these off, then I might go back and do it proper. Okay, so it looks like I have one spare as well, just in alignment with the other components. So let's just do a count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. Alright, so they're all in, and now I'm just going to go back through, just give them a light touch up. Gotta be careful that I'm not going to end up scratching anything. Very light touch indeed. Wait. Okay, so we have one spare, and that will go in and seal. So now when you're done, you will have the screws in on the top. There will be a standoff in between, and then it will be screwed in on the bottom on all 26 contact points. Now here is Stabies housing. Actually, if it says Stabies, then it'll be the actual stabilizer. I'm not too concerned about this being opened, so I'm sure they've got more of these. Yeah, okay, so they're clear POM Stabies with there's the kit with the actual wire arms for them. So that's pretty cool. So you'll see they've got the clear housing, and then they've got the actual POM. So they'll be a little bit smoother compared to potentially a different material that's not the POM. So compared to, well, they're just clear POMs rather than black nylon POM. There you go. So what have they got there? Oh, clear polycarbonate with the POM stem. So they're the same stems, different color, but the housing is clear polycarbonate instead of the nylon for the default kit. So that's cool. Alright, let's just pop them back in. If I need to update this later on or reshoot it, we can go around the boy and build this a second time. That's not a problem. Then we can do so at a later date, an update video. So we'll just leave that. And now the really exciting part is Navy ECs. So we'll try and be gentle with these on opening it up. Look at that. Nice little container. They look great. They look really, really great. Now, they remind me so much of the housings that you would pop out of those other keyboards. Okay, so there is actually the conical spring. So you can see the actual conical spring. There's actually a magnet at the top. I wonder if the magnet is actually simply there to hold the spring. Now I'm just tugging on this gently, not to damage it, but it is actually held in there quite well. And then you've actually got an actual rubber dome that's held in, so you can see it's got like these bits on the corner that it plugs into on the opposite corners. So if I was to be very gentle, yeah, you can see the actual dome has a stem hole, and it actually plugs into the corner to hold it there, so you don't have loose domes just flapping about like we've all experienced in the past for those who've played with it. And of course, as I depress the switch, you will see the dome is actually held in place, which is quite nice. It's quite neat. Now I do wonder though if, okay, so the magnet is actually stuck, well not stuck but positioned inside the dome, and as I suspected, it's just a flat MX slider on the top, and what they're doing is just using the retention of these domes to hold that. Now yeah, okay, so if I will put it back in and then pop the two corners back on, then it's back to normal. Very cool. Now the orientation of these should be, very good question. Do they even have an orientation? They should have an orientation. There's housing clips, sorry, there's plate clips on the sides there. So you can see there's the actual clips. So there is kind of an orientation. There's an AE logo and Tech C on the actual housing itself. So if I can get the focus, there you go, AE on the bottom right, and then there's the tech up the top left. So I would say that that is probably the orientation that it's going to want to go. So let's start in the top corner, and does that go in? Snap. All right, first switch in. Interesting. So just the sound of one switch the feel of it's nice. Don't get me wrong, but the sound is actually surprisingly metallic. It doesn't have a thock sound to it by comparison to what I was expecting it was going to sound like. It's not that it's a bad sound, it's just a different sound to what I was expecting. So let's just put in another one that I haven't adulterated. Okay, so it could be just because that one's in the middle and not on the end, so the plate is actually vibrating differently. Yeah, so that one sounds a little bit more closer to what I was thinking it might sound, though it does have a bit of a like a friction sound, like a grinding sound, like a wearing sound on it. So I wonder if you would think about wanting to maybe lube the stem, the actual slider, so that it reduces potentially some of that sound. Alright, now I could go ahead and put all of these in, but I'm not going to go and kit it out with keycaps and things like that, because a sound test of that nature is not going to be representative because it's not inside the keyboard. And the sound test in itself is not necessarily going to be representative for everybody anyway. It's only indicative simply because of the fact that whatever switches, sorry, not switches, whatever keycaps that you choose to use will also impact the way that it sounds. The obviously microphones that I'm using and your speakers and all those kinds of things all play part of the sound chain. So a sound test is only indicative and not necessarily 100% representative. Furthermore, you know, since I can't mount this into the keyboard anyway, I don't want to potentially risk any issues with the plate, marking up the plate and so forth. But what I will do, just to have a look at how this calibration process is I'm going to see, because I haven't snapped that end bit off, I don't know if I can actually plug in a USB-C cable to it. That is something I didn't really think about. So if my cable is not going to, can I flex that without snapping it off? I cannot get it in. Alright, I was hoping that I could potentially get that in, and that would allow me to be able to plug it into VR and show you the calibration process. But I currently cannot unless if I snap that off, and I'm hesitant to do that until I get a little bit more confirmation about that, and then we can kind of go from there if that is actually what is going to be required. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm wanting to make sure that I do things right by Keyboard Treehouse rather than just going off on my own on it. Okay, so what I might do is, I'm just having a look at, it's already 50 minutes, right? So it's a pretty long video. If you're interested in seeing more around the calibration steps, let's just have a quick look at what that looks like, because Lightning keyboards has their guide on it. So it's really nicely done. It's absolutely fantastically done. So you'll see they're talking about breaking it off, top rail, bottom rail, you know, prepping your stabilizers, lubing them and stuff like that if that's what you're into. Same thing as what I've just gone and done, put in all the screws, put in all the standoffs, putting into the plates, putting into the switches, and then prepping the VIO component. So you want to go to VIO and then you plug it in, you need to calibrate it, and you have a full depress of the switch as part of the process. So there's steps in here to just go through that process, and then of course you can pop it into the case and start closing it up. I of course am not going to do that because of what I'm currently doing with the actual PCB, so we will kind of wrap it up there. I think this is a really nice kit. It's very effective. It's cost effective, especially because it comes with these switches, has everything to be able to convert your keyboard, and if you don't like the way that it is and you want to just go back to your satellite however it was, you just pull this part out and then put your other PCB and switches and plate back in. So it's actually kind of like almost a hot swap deck, because once you built this, that's it. Now if you've got somebody else who has a satellite and they're thinking about getting the EC kit, heck, you could even just pull this out and lend it to them to plug into their satellite, and all they have to do is just recalibrate it if necessary, and then they can try it and check it out, and they don't have to really do anything except just take the case apart, pull out their existing MX mount PCB and put this in, and vice versa when handing it back, before they decide to get one or not, and things like that. So I think this is actually a really cool way of designing it and doing it. It's a very sort of compact kit. Like, it came in a huge box, but there was, you know, so much empty space in it anyway. Definitely could have used a smaller box if they wanted to, but as you can see, in an hour, of course I talked quite a bit as well. You could easily, probably about an hour, hour and a half to fully fit this up, stabilizers and things like that, depending on how fast you work, especially with applying lube and things. And snapping these in would have probably taken me about, you know, 10 minutes, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and then it would have been ready to go into calibration. So I am going to wrap it up there. I want to say once again, thank you very much to Keyboard Treehouse for sending me this kit to actually check out, despite the fact that I haven't done a full build on it or anything like that yet. I will get in touch with them just to find out if they want me to actually break off these rails or not, because then if I do and I'm sending this back, it's not going to be, you know, in the same condition for somebody else to use. If you like this kind of stuff, of course, the usual YouTube stuff, buttons, subscriptions, bell notifications below. If you want to check out any of the woodworking stuff, please do. There's a couple of videos here and there related to systems engineering and stuff like that as well. So yeah, we will see you on the next video. And of course, as usual, until next time, happy clacking.